Welcome and good morning, everyone. I'm Ryan Fazan, for those of you that don't know me, and I want to thank you all for showing up today on behalf of our host, Tyler Spain. Talking about trends in this industry is my absolute favorite thing. And this year's an exciting one, and things are a little bit different, and technology is changing, and I'm really excited to share all of that with you. For those of you that missed coverings this year, the world of ceramics is completely different, and I'm going to show you a little bit about how the technology is changing and what there is to get excited about. And there's a lot in this industry, so let's jump into it. This year's trends I'm calling serving generational solutions. It's not anything revolutionary. It's what ceramics have been doing since we started. And it's really very timely right now, because the world's sort of focus and priorities are really shifting, and we're starting to realize, much like this quote from Pope John Paul, maybe ironically, maybe not, is probably one of the most sort of poignant things for people today. And we're starting to realize the impacts of our choices down the line, past and beyond our simple lifespan. And it's starting to really come into consciousness that we really need to start shifting the connotations of what it means to put our footprint on the earth. Up until now, pretty much universally, if mankind stepped into a natural environment, our impact was a net negative. And we're really starting to focus on changing that connotation to a much more positive and beneficial one. I'm just going to pause here, and because I've noticed there is a question in chat, please feel free to drop questions into chat or in the Q&A if you can, and I'll make sure I get to them at the end. So as I said, we're trying to change our connotation, and we're starting to see this shift in multiple different industries. When we start to see this kind of shifting language, and one key word that I've been seeing across multiple different business categories is the word regenerative. And we're seeing it as like a prefix for tourism, agriculture, tech, and entertainment. There's regenerative versions of these that are focused not primarily on profit. First, obviously, if it's a business, profit is important. But what is more important is that it's a net positive impact for the communities that they serve and the places that they operate in. Because one of the things that's most important to each and every one of us today, as the world gets more complex and we have more confusion and knowing what's true and what's not true, and how to sort of figure out what the baseline truth is behind a business, a person, a statement. Transparency is one of the most important things for consumers today. And it's really encouraging to start seeing businesses shift from a profit first mentality, where the only thing that's important in a business is profit, to an approach that's closer akin to something that doctors and nurses prescribe to, which is the Hippocratic Oath, which is first, I will do no harm, and then I will achieve my other goals. And we're starting to see individuals and businesses really shift towards that, because trust is becoming the most valuable commodity that we have in the world today. And I think you'll start to see as we go through this session that ceramics are really well suited to be at the spearhead of this charge and change in shifting priorities for us. Because if there is a face, I can't look at this without laughing. If there is a face that describes the 2020s, it's this one. Because it's so hard. Like I said, it's so hard to figure out what people's motivations are, what businesses' motivations are, what's actually happening behind the scenes. You have to do so much digging. And the fact that we have arguments all the time today about the difference in definition of misinformation and disinformation, it really means that there's a serious trust issue right now. So embodying extreme ownership and being able to say what you mean and actually have a net positive impact on your client base and on the people and communities that you interact with is incredibly important to people today. And that's why ceramics have the ability to really be a front runner and a leader in this shifting sort of priorities for our consumers today. Because if transparency is the most important thing, being able to embody benevolent principles and have a benevolent effect is an incredibly important thing, because it's easy to be transparent when you don't have anything to hide. And in fact, when we look in ceramics history, we know what we know about past civilizations because of things like the glazed faience tile found in Egyptian tombs, and the Ishtar Gate of the ancient Assyrian Empire. And all of the wonderful tones in those ceramics that have been preserved for millennia, we're at a point today in this industry that we can reproduce them in all of that beautiful organic glory in a modern way, in repeatable fashion. And I'm going to share with you all of the tech that goes into that in our ceramics today. But one of the most important things when it comes to just sort of a baseline understanding of ceramics is that ceramics are one of the best sort of examples of biomimicry. If you think of it in a certain way, when the earth is making stone, which is essentially what ceramics are, is man-made stone, there is natural minerals that are exposed to pressure and heat and fused into a natural stone. And that's exactly what we do in the ceramic industry. And in over 4,000 years of history of us as humans making ceramic material, that recipe has never changed. We've never found a way to do it better than simple moldable clays mixed with one of the most abundant minerals on the earth, feldspar, and other abundant minerals like silicates and other mineral oxides for pigmentation. We're fusing all of that together with immense pressure and then exposing it to heat to sinter that into a man-made stone. So really, ceramics are one of the first human examples of biomimicry and looking at nature as a guide and as a mentor. And there's a pretty famous podcaster. He's an ex SEAL trainer, and his podcast and his book and a TED Talk are all based on this one concept of extreme ownership. And I think that, anyway, his name is Jocko Willink, so go check him out. He's actually got some really poignant thoughts on what extreme ownership means. And it really speaks to the need for transparency today. And I think that ceramics have that capability to very easily step into an extreme ownership place that is unbelievably refreshing for a client today because of the biomimicry, because it's inert before, during, and at the end of its life, that it's 100% natural inputs and outputs, that it inherently promotes the health of the occupants. And everything that we know about ceramics really builds into the message that it's preserving what we're creating for generations of service. The only thing that generally is brought up in terms of ceramics is the high embodied carbon and emissions in the industry. But in leader countries like Spain, where there is the Ceramic Union and their commitment to reducing their carbon footprint and their emissions by up to 55% by 2050. There's all sorts of work that's going into reducing that footprint and that embodied carbon, and making it an even better sort of de facto choice in today's market. So first, before we get into pretty tile and colors and shapes and everything like that, I really think it's important, especially right now, to talk about the capabilities that we have in the industry, because they've changed dramatically in the past, I'm going to say about 18 months. And what we can do today is so far beyond, if you haven't looked at tile in a couple of years, it's so far beyond what you've seen. And there's a lot that goes into why we can do that. But first, because we're focused on generational solutions, on adding value beyond a human lifespan, ceramics take a very different approach to trends. When you think of color trends and things like that, generally we go to things like Benjamin Moore, other paint companies, and the Pantone Color Institute, and we look at their color of the year and their forecasts for what's going to be trending and what's really important to clients at this moment. In ceramics, we kind of take a much longer view because we're going to be around for a long time. So the literal color trends that are important right now, of course, they're important in ceramics, but what we look at is the kind of curve that happens over, let's say, a decade. And we'll look at what the colors trends are for this decade and try to pick the through line that's a common thread. And then we'll develop our tones to be complementary around these more transient trending tones. And so that's sometimes why we see a lot of colors that aren't necessarily right on trend, but they're trend adjacent. And that's what happens in ceramics, because we're looking for symbiosis with design, not domination. And that's kind of a different perspective that the ceramics industry takes because of its long lifespan. That becomes incredibly important when it comes to incorporating the kind of tech that we're doing to create looks like this, where you can't believe what we're achieving because everything is in register. We're printing not just color, but we're printing texture. We're printing variance and reflectivity and surface finish. And I'm going to show you why. Now, everyone's familiar with the fact that we can print using inkjet technology in ceramics. The technology was introduced in the year 2000 at the Spanish ceramics fair, Tevisama in Valencia. I don't call it inkjet anymore because when I say inkjet, what people come to mind is the DeskJet printers that you have in your office or in your home, and all it prints is color. And that's so much less than we do now. What I call it is digital decoration. Because in the year 2000, what we had was essentially a ceramic DeskJet printer. And it had 4 color bars. It wasn't CMYK, it was something very close to that. But we basically had 4 colors that we could print an array using a matrix of color and our eyes reading it as such. About a decade later, we started to realize that it was a little bit too confining for what we did in ceramics, and we wanted some extra colors, things like white and natural gray, as opposed to creating a gray from a blend to get a perfect midtone and to be able to add highlights digitally using white. So we added that. About 5 years after that, we could add one finish. We could either select a glaze, not a glaze, sorry, a finish. So an ink that would be either matte or gloss, so that we could add some reflectivity variance. We could print a glue, etc., different effects. 3 years after that, we could add one more effect. But today, we now have printers that offer 6 colors and 6 effects. And what that does for us in terms of capabilities is it lets us create some of the most natural looking things in the world that we've ever seen in ceramics, that really mimic what natural variance and spontaneity embodies. And I've got a really good slide that will illustrate that in just a second. But first, I want to talk about color space. Color space is actually 3-dimensional, and depending on how you're rendering it, is more constrained or broader. So when we talk about DeskJet printers, traditional desktop publishing using cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, that's one of the narrowest versions of 3-dimensional color space that we could print. That was where inkjet started in ceramics. Once we get into sRGB, that's the next triangle there that goes a little bit broader than CMYK. That's what we see on our high definition screens. Adobe RGB is a broader spectrum that takes into account the entire Pantone color spectrum, as well as what we can see on screens. And then there's the full 3-dimensional color space. And the way that we get there is by reflectivity and different surface values of how much light is absorbed and reflected from the surface. Because if we're looking at a picture, when we see that, our mind goes, yeah, the sun is yellow, the ocean is blue, the sand is kind of browny, and then we've got the green on the rocks. But as we pixelate that and then zoom in, you start to see how much variance is actually in those tones and how much color there is because of surface texture and reflectivity of that surface and how light bounces off of it and what our eyes actually read. That is what true spontaneity is. We don't have solid colors in nature because of all of that natural variance that happens. And that's how, and that's why the ability to print all of these different effects is enhancing ceramics to an incredible degree. So before we get into examples of all of this, I do want to talk about a couple other advancements that are really making a huge impact, both on the sustainable characteristics and the workability and cost of installation in ceramics. And one of those ways is gauges. We're familiar with the term gauges, hopefully a lot of us, in relation to the large format lamina style production, porcelain slab or sintered stone material. It's important to know that we're manipulating gauges in traditional dry press production and extrusion production today as well, in not just porcelain, but also wall body ceramic and other ceramic products, because by reducing the thickness of our tile just by a fraction, but by a millimeter, it has a huge impact on the installation costs, most importantly, the shipping costs for us here in North America, where we're getting a lot of our material from, whether it's domestic or imported from Spain, it's got to be shipped. And the more we can reduce our material in thickness, the less weight there is, the more efficient it is to ship it around the world. And it just gets better and better. The fact for an installer that we can create ceramic wall material at a minimal thickness now is a huge thing for an installer, because we're seeing a lot more white body and red body wall ceramic material being specified again, as manufacturers are getting better and better technology in that sector. And that's huge for an installer, because our bits, our saw blades, everything has a much longer life. When we're using a material like a wall body ceramic that isn't quite as dense and hard as our super dense porcelain, that's really meant for floors and exterior installation. So I'm loving seeing this manipulation of gauges transfer into the ceramic field as well, so that we can really harness the full potential of gauges. Now, this is another thing that the industry is focused very, very heavily on, is trying to find an alternate fuel source to natural gas. And we're seeing huge strides being made in this field of R&D in the industry. It's one of the key ways that we're actually going to achieve the 55% decrease in carbon emissions, as well as global warming and acid rain emissions that come from our production facilities by transferring away from traditional fossil fuels. In some wall, tile, and smaller format factories, we're seeing a lot of work switching over to electric kilns. But Spain is kind of unique in that they have a graduate studies ceramic engineering program in Castellón, as well as a nationally funded think tank for the ceramic industry called ITC. And these two bodies partnered together to create a path for the industry to transfer from natural gas to hydrogen. It was something that was successfully done last year, actually a year ago, almost today. It was done, and there's a bunch of literature on that, and it's something. It was very intelligent the way that they went to do this. They actually realized that it was going to be very hard for the industry to switch from a fuel source to another and actually change all of their firing machinery, all of their kilns. It would be difficult and expensive. So what they're working with right now is a blended fuel source that's utilizing some hydrogen, because it's also kind of difficult to, right now, it's difficult and expensive to create enough hydrogen to switch entire industries over. So they're doing a blended fuel source with hydrogen and natural gas to give both the hydrogen production industry and the ceramic industry time to catch up to this this shift and be able to do a gradual switchover. So there's all kinds of exciting things that are happening behind the scenes to increase the sustainability of ceramics that I wanted to just give you a little snapshot on. So enough about capabilities and science and all that techie stuff. Let's get into a little bit of some eye candy and what some examples of all of this technology are. This is probably one of the best images that I've found to describe sort of my thought process on trends in this industry. And trends in general really are driven by the results of trends, are really driven by what our capabilities are. Basically, in this case, our goal is to light a room. Depending on the capabilities at our disposal, we're able to do that more effectively and more efficiently as our technology progresses. But the end goal is more or less the same, and the end results are more or less the same. In every case, we're lighting this room, but we're doing it more and more efficiently with a broader and broader spectrum of light as our technology increases. So why do I bring that up? I bring that up because in the last 4 years, we've gone through some of the biggest changes as a species that I think any of us could imagine. And it's shifted our desires, our priorities, and our needs dramatically. But all of those trends really are still very valid today in the world of ceramics. So everything that we've seen that has really kind of come into the fore is just kind of affecting what comes next and informing what comes next. Just like the rings of a tree, the shape of the ring before it affects the ring after it. That's what we're seeing in trends. So all of these still have incredible relevance to consumers and a lot of impact in product design, in our industry. So I'm going to go through some of the more important ones that we've seen. And the first one, I don't know if my picture is kind of taking up the screen, but is biophilia. And that's creating a reflection of nature, and this is one that a lot of people forget, but that we do in ceramic quite a bit, simply creating a space that supports the inclusion of nature, relevant tones, complementary themes, and things like that. And I've got a really good example of that as we come up. But there's all kinds of ways that we can sort of create around this sort of core theme of biophilia. We can simply utilize texture in a monochrome installation that gives the feeling of natural forms and natural textures, that uses light and shadow the way nature does, and different reflectivity values to create a monochrome and subdued theme of biophilia. A little bit heavier than that, but still in the kind of suggestive realm, is the tonal echo, where we've got sort of a base of a natural stone or a wood or something that is inherently natural as well. And then we're just overlaying it with a slightly different echo of a natural form and print. Where it becomes incredibly exciting and revolutionary for specifically ceramics is because of the ability to decorate with glaze. And I love seeing third fire ceramics coming back into vogue for a lot of manufacturers. Those of you that aren't familiar, we use some of our most delicate minerals, glazes, and true metals to add decorative layers to our ceramic programs for our most decorative products. They're fired a second or third time at a much lower temperature to be able to care for and lightly sinter those really delicate minerals. And I love seeing this come back because obviously it's more expensive, but it's adding value that other products really can't do because they don't operate in glaze. They don't fire and sinter their material. And if someone's already chosen to create generational value with a premium product like ceramics, having everything the industry can do at your disposal in terms of decorative capability is a really, really good thing to just add value on top of value. And I love seeing that coming back in a big way. So keep your eye out for third fire decoratives, because we've been really interested in the capabilities in digital, things like this ghosting effect, where we're printing just a finish that adds depth and layers. And this is a single fire decorative program where this this decorative tile is essentially more or less the same cost as the field tile. And what we can do in single fire today with all of that digital decoration available to us is absolutely mind-blowing. But then for someone that really wants to go to the next level, having the third fire option again is a huge thing. I love seeing in biophilia, I love seeing the marriage of humans and the natural world, because that's really the core concept of biophilia. So things like these micro tessellations, think back to like MC Escher and the ability to use geometry to tessellate and create a three-dimensional image, but then we're pairing it with natural forms, again, much like Escher did. And it's something that we're seeing in a lot of our wallpaper-like collections, where we're also doing just literally wallpaper, more durable, longer lasting, and better than the actual material. And again, the capabilities, the textures, like you can actually, in this one, when you get close to it, you can actually see the silk threads that have been digitally created in that wallpaper look. So it's truly stunning what we can do. Now, this is what I was talking about, a space that's supportive and complementary to natural forms being integrated into the environment. This is a cement slash oxidized metal series that's been done, and a lot of care has been taken so that all of the oxidization and the weathering that happens within each of these colorways has natural color, texture, and form to it. So if you look at that green living wall there beside the soaker tub, and you notice those rust tones, the golden tones, all of these are the tones that we're seeing in the accents within this really organic looking program. And we're seeing a lot more of that, where we're looking to nature for inspiration and texture and tonality, and creating our programs so that it looks good with plants and vegetation around it, because we're seeing a lot more of that being incorporated into our designs. So that leads into organic forms and these raw forms that are minimally worked, but really, most importantly, letting the soul of the material that they're showcasing shine through, and not trying to optimize them or make them something more than they are. I'm loving seeing a lot of this raw organic feel come into ceramics, and a lot of it is because of those digital capabilities I was talking about previously. The fact that we can marry the structure in a mold with digital, either adding volume using glue and gramillas, or subtracting volume using things like Camaleonte inks that sink into the surface, so that we can manipulate the mold structure and have it pair perfectly with different volumes that we can add or take away, that pairs perfectly with the graphic to create something truly mind-blowing. We're adding more and more texture because we can drop all of this onto any kind of molded surface. We're able to manipulate texture and reflectivity digitally that's in register with the graphic as well, so that we're adding variable contrast, whether it's in structure or in surface finish, so that we can have multiple different finishes within the same piece. In this case of the sunflower, we've got a matte glaze in the background there, and that stone sort of basalt look. And then the overall colors of the sunflower are in a satin that's a little bit less matte. And then we've got a high sheen black line. So we've got all of this natural variance that we see in if we were walking outside within the scope of one piece of ceramic material. The fact is that people are valuing authenticity over embellishment today, and whether we're creating ceramics that look like ceramics or ceramics that look like something else, we're able with our technology today to create some of the most authentic forms that we've ever been able to see. And one of the most incredible ways to do that is simply creating raw earth, the texture, the colors, the feel, and the natural sort of enveloping hug of natural earth. And we're seeing a lot of those tones, colors, and structures come into our ceramic programs as well. One of my favorite ways, and we saw this in that example where I had the ancient Egyptian faience tile and the Ishtar gate from Assyria, we're able to recreate those sometimes millennia old patinas that develop from our natural mineral glazes and weathering over time. And we're able to print that digitally using both color and texture and finish, so that we have the whole picture of what a patina truly is. And we can do that today in an amazing way. The fact is, even single color programs, as we saw in that pixelated picture of that beach, we're using more and more variation in our more or less monochromatic. This is a more or less monochromatic program, and yet look at all that variance. It's at least a V3. And that's what we're seeing a shifting preference for, is more and more natural variants incorporated into our programs, even when they're simple solid color ceramics. We're creating adaptive materials that we want to be surrounded with, that are protective of our humanity and our really relevant, quickly changing gears lifestyle that we have today, and responsive to our busy lives. But we want to do that in a way that is approachable and affordable for our clients. And so we're seeing a lot of illusionary installs, things like a solid piece like this fish scale that's scored, things that look like they're water jet but aren't, that help create the looks without asking a huge installation budget. And one of the ways we can do that is by all of the ancillary manufacturers that are creating some amazing assistance tools for our installers, so that we can design very specifically around a really regular joint width and a very flat installation. So our product developers are able to create stuff that we've never been able to do, because we have the tools for our installers now to be able to realize those visions. So we can do those illusionary installs because we know if we're using a system like this that we're going to have an exactly regular joint, so that the illusion isn't lost when there's a slight variance between one edge of a tile to another, so that we can score those lines, and the line that's scored into the tile is exactly identical to the line in between tile to tile because of these ancillary systems. I want to show some really simple low-tech solutions as well. And this was one that was unveiled at Sevisama this year in Valencia that, oh, there it is, it's coming in. It just took a while. It blew my mind just with its simplicity. And this is the kind of thing that we're seeing in ceramics that I love to see, that doesn't take high-tech solutions. What this is a simple 2-centimeter decking tile, but it's using the shape of a wooden plank to create drainage channels within the body of that tile. Because it's extruded, we're also creating the edges that are interlocking tongue and groove, so that it's dry laid, but it's a cohesive, unified system that allows for drainage within this pool deck. Could be a patio, could be any number of uses for a product like this. That's just simple physical engineering using a ceramic body and all of the value that's inherent in that. One of the reasons why we're seeing a lot of growth in the ceramic industry is because of the seamless performance from inside to outside. People in 2020 realized how important their outside space was, whether they're a business or a homeowner. The ability to leverage all of the space on your property is incredibly important to us in post-pandemic times. So we're starting to see clients shift their thought process to unifying those spaces from inside to outside, and need to have a cohesive performance and a cohesive look that goes across both spaces. So we're seeing ceramics being used as opposed to something like a wood or a vinyl or something else, because we want that unified look from inside to out. And our manufacturers are developing things like, they could be called everywhere glaze, in-out glaze. There's a bunch of different names that each manufacturer uses. What's important about them is that they're smooth to the touch. They have a high slip resistance value, but they actually have a higher slip resistance value when they're wet. And so it's something that transitions very easily from inside to outside. It's easy to clean in both environments, and it responds to both environments in an optimized way. We've seen augmented reality in video games, in cinema, in all sorts of different aspects of our life. And it's something that we're able to do in ceramics because of our digital capabilities, the ability to add true mineral glazes into, like true metallic glazes, or metallic, non-metallic glazes with a high sheen, that so that that tile, if I go back to that one there where the veins are actually silver, it's actually printed in a gray, and then they've got a high gloss ink that goes on top of it. So it's a varied gray that has the look of a metallic, and then they print a high gloss ink on top of it so that the effect is metallic. But this is something that can go on a floor and withstand traffic. So the ability to augment reality is sort of where we're getting in this industry, to create contingency agnostic material. In this case, both of these stones, that Bernini marble and the Ceppo di Gray, are not well suited to a busy kitchen environment or the pavers in the exterior. And yet we can give a client any look that they're looking for with the structure, the feel, the reflectivity, the natural spontaneity in a material that doesn't care what life is going to throw at it. My last sort of overarching theme that I want to get into is history. And I call this kind of utopian reminiscence, because our minds do funny things in terms of what we remember. And generally, we either remember the best or the worst of a situation or event. And that's what sticks in our memory. And then our memory of it kind of shifts around that. What I'm seeing in our industry is this look back onto the best times of design inspiration in our history. And we're kind of morphing it to fit the modern world, color palette, design characteristics, and needs. And so we're seeing this illusory memory illusion, where we used to see terrazzo pretty much only in public works buildings in high traffic areas, because it was poured in place and it needed big scope. And we're seeing a lot of residential, light commercial uses of terrazzo using all that variegation and that beauty of that natural material, and bringing it into areas where we never saw it in the past when it was in its heyday. This is sort of just a nod, because this is a vintage furniture designer from Spain, very famous, also does partnership with a tile collection, and he kind of embodies this trend that I kept seeing coming up more and more. We saw sort of mid-century modern for a very long time. It's still very, very relevant. But we started to see over the past couple of years this rise of what they're calling Middle Ages modern, or castle core, where there's a lot of really raw, hand-done touches that are paired against some of the more modern materials that we see in our ceramics. What I love is when ceramic engineers and designers look at a cornucopia of human artistic talent, and then they kind of mash them all together into this wonderful form that we have in our capabilities today. We're like, in this case, we've got a traditional pottery glaze that's paired with watercolor sort of blending and movement. And then it's all paired into a traditional 1970s, 1950s, 70s kind of modernist geometric form and shape that's creating something wholly new. What I find incredibly encouraging as someone that has worked in product development is one of the most important things as a creative is to leverage your capabilities intelligently. And I love seeing this intelligent use. Despite all the breadth of capabilities that we have, we're not always mashing everything into one piece. In some cases, we just want to add a little bit of reflectivity and a little bit of volume. In other cases, maybe we do need 4 or 5 different effects. And I love seeing the restraint that a lot of our manufacturers are using, despite the huge range of capabilities that they have. In the end, what we're able to do in this industry is truly shape the future with references of our past. that has new and fresh takes based on our new capabilities, but everything's rooted in, or at least informed by, past sort of characteristics, desires, and periods of our history, because ceramics have been with us since pretty much the beginning. Basically, what our manufacturers are able to do today is tell a client, no matter what space you have, no matter what your vision is, what we can do is create for you the perfect forever solution that will be there for you, for your children, and for your children's children, no matter what that perfect forever looks like to you in that space. Basically, at the end of the day, design today truly equals benevolence. Design is there to solve a problem. And what we're looking to do today, more than ever as a species, is not only create a solution, but a benevolent solution, both for us, for future generations, and for our planet, because our creations truly have consequences beyond us. So I hope I've given you some food for thought and some excitement on what we've got going on in the ceramic industry. I think it's one of the most exciting times in my career. And I really appreciate all of you stopping by and checking out the session. So let me take a look at chat here and see if we've got any questions. We do, so there's a press kit for images, and there's a link in chat if you do want it. And if you want to share this session afterwards also, it will be hosted on TopSpainUSA.com. So make sure you check out there in the Learning and Resource Center. James, have supply chain disruptions impacted the distribution and sale of Spanish ceramic around the world? As a result, has limited availability of certain styles or brands of tile impacted what is currently trending? Really good questions. So I'm going to say over the past 4 years, yeah, there have been some impacts based on supply chain and more importantly, logistics, cost, and availability in exports. That being said, Spain has been growing in exports to the US, and last year was the #1 by volume. Sorry, by value, not volume. And this year I think is #2 by value. So it really hasn't detrimentally affected Spanish exports to the US as much as maybe some other exporting nations have been. That being said, it of course does affect the what we're seeing here in North America. But that's been kind of insulated. The effects of that have kind of been insulated because a lot of the manufacturers do have either their own distribution centers. A lot of them have East and West Coast distribution centers, and they're landing product here and being able to quick ship it out. Tile Spain USA does have the quick ship program on their website that showcases a lot of those collections. Yeah, I hope that answers your question, James. If not, please feel free to chime in again or ping me after the session. Thank you all for sharing your Wednesday morning with me. I really appreciate all of you, and hope that you got something out of today's session. Feel free to reach out to us at TileSpainUSA.com and let us know if there's any other questions that you have. We're happy to help out. Have a great day, everyone, and thank you very much for coming.